Good morning, everybody, and welcome to episode 4 of Walk the Talk. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Nikki, and I am one of the coaches and co-founders at Point 3 Wellbeing. And I will be your host today, taking you through the next 45 minutes on the very timely subject of this time of change. We are going to be exploring with our guest, Imogen Wall, how to equip people to manage and embrace the return to work, whether that be in the office, remotely, or a hybrid of the two. Our Walk the Talk webcast really encourages you to get out walking whilst we do the talking. So please see this as an opportunity to plug in your headphones and step outside. It's also, we're recording this in conjunction with Mental Health Awareness Week, where the theme is connecting with nature. So please, if you would like to, take this opportunity to take us outside with you on a walk while we do all of the talking. In the next 45 minutes, we're going to be exploring this subject of change. Our webinar is aimed at HR professionals, at people leaders, and anyone really interested in better supporting themselves and those around them. So if this is a topic you think could be of interest to others, please know that we're recording this, and please do share it around after the session. So for now, I'd like to introduce our guest of the day, Imogen Wall. Imogen, if you could turn your camera on and unmute and say hello to everyone, please.
I'm here. Hello.
Hi, Imogen. Welcome. I'm going to harness, for anyone who knows Elizabeth Day and her wonderful podcast, I'm going to now aim to emulate Elizabeth Day by introducing you, Imogen. So I'll give it my best shot. Here we go. So Imogen Wall is a mental health professional. She is a qualified therapist and mental health first aid instructor, specializing in stress, crisis management, and international perspectives on psychological issues. Imogen's mental health work developed following a 15-year career as a humanitarian disaster response expert with the United Nations, where she was deployed to numerous emergencies, including the Haiti earthquake, Indian Ocean tsunami, and the 2017 hurricanes in the Caribbean. Imogen's clients for mental health training and support include the UK government, Palladium, and International Location Safety, for whom she designs and delivers content for those going into high-risk situations. Imogen is also a trained Samaritan and trauma risk management practitioner, as well as being mum to the cutest bundle of kitten fur that is Delilah Oreo, and I'm secretly hoping that Delilah Oreo might put in an appearance today. So thank you very much, Imogen, for joining us today.
Oh, you're welcome. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. And that makes you sound quite impressive, doesn't it, that list? It's funny hearing other people do the introductions. Alas, Delilah Oreo she was in London this weekend. We had her down to London, my little baby kitten. She lives with my partner in Oxford. And she freaked us all out by arriving and disappearing straight up my chimney.
Oh, so she won't be joining us today.
She won't be joining us today. She's gone back home. So I'm sad about that too.
Next time. Okay, Imogen, before we launch into our conversation, I just want to share some data which has recently been released and put some context around today's conversation of this time of change. So for anybody who wants to dig out the report, it's called Work Smarter to Live Better. It's been published by Microsoft in partnership with YouGov and the CIPD. And it tells us, amongst other things, that 87% of employees reported their business have adapted to hybrid working. So this is happening, no surprises. But then we get some quite interesting statistics. We can see that 56% of people reported an increase in happiness during working from home, so just over half, which would suggest that just under half haven't. 55% use lunch breaks to focus on their personal life. So just over half, which would suggest that just under half don't. And 53% feel they have to be available at all times when remote working. So just over half, which suggests that just under half don't. So some quite sort of conflicting statistics, and one that you shared with me hot off the press this morning. When it comes to returning to normal life, whatever that's going to look like, a recent study from Anxiety UK has said that 37% of people are looking forward to returning to normal life. 36% are feeling uneasy about it, and the rest just don't know. So it's striking from these statistics how this time of change is bringing with it a lot of polarized opinions and confusion. So that leads me to my first question to you, Imogen. Why are we feeling so conflicted about this point in time?
It's a very good question, isn't it? Because, and quite an unexpected one in some ways, because the public narrative here in the UK, at least, is so much like, yay, we can finally see light at the end of the tunnel. This is great. And obviously, to feel like this terrible pandemic with all the suffering it has brought is over is a wonderful thing. And to feel like we can go back to lives, you know, the public narrative is very much one of excitement and anticipation, but over and over again, I'm talking to people who are feeling very differently, and then actually a huge range of feelings, very much reflected by that Anxiety UK data. I was quite relieved to see that in a way, because it made me feel like the people I was talking to were not aberrations, that there's really not no consensus. I think that's really one of the interesting things. There's no consensus on an emotional level, there's no consensus on a psychological level, and that's playing out in the workplace into everybody being, you know, making different decisions and having different ideas about what the future is going to look like. And actually the interesting thing is, and I can tell you this from my training as well as from my personal experience, there are actually really good reasons for this to be as complex as it is. If you look at the research, for example, if you look at the research into people who spend a lot of time in isolation, and this is a whole, it's quite niche, but this is a whole kind of field. What happens to people when you put them in very constrained circumstances? People who live in submarines, people who work in the Arctic or the Antarctic, people who go into space. And what you see starting kind of this Arctic exploration just over 100 years ago, that's where this sort of field really began. You see that going into very different circumstances, particularly constrained circumstances, actually really changes people. And there's been a big resurgence of interest in this area in the last few years, actually not because of the pandemic, but because of the prospect of travel to Mars. This has sort of become something that is really driving a lot of research at the moment. So what you see from that data, it's really clear, is that if you've been isolated, or if you've been constrained, as we all have, even though to a lesser degree than people who live on submarines, but still the same principle applies. You are exposed to just lower levels of emotional stimulus, and we're social creatures. That's what drives our behavior, our brains, the way our brains work. So if you reduce the amount of stimulation in your life, your brain adapts to that. So your senses adapt as well. Life in confinement is often very structured and repetitive. And that also, you adapt to that, and that can be, we've recommended it as a coping mechanism, bringing structure into your life. But it feels like all that's suddenly going to be taken away. That is also quite destabilizing. So also we've had some time to reflect. Time away from normal life can lead to desire for significant change. So one aspect of this is we've all had different experiences of this pandemic, and this is really important. This whole kind of, we've all been in the same storm, but not in the same boat. So some people have found it's very difficult. Some people have quite enjoyed the remote working. Some people have lost somebody, have had absolute tragedy brought to their lives. All of us have gone through change over the last year. So it's quite a lot has happened to us. In addition to the constraints being such that they've probably actually changed our brains a bit. So we've gone through a big adaptive process to get used to being in a pandemic, and you've got to go through another adaptive process to come out of it. You can't, even though it looks familiar, you can't just switch back to how things were, because that doesn't really exist anymore. That's different, and you are different too. So we're grappling with all of that. Plus, it's worth saying, it's in that Microsoft research as well, everybody's exhausted. I mean, we've been working our little bottoms off for a year, not just kind of professionally, but also just adapting to constant change, which itself is massively stressful and massively tiring. So everybody's really tired. I think the research in Microsoft said 39% of workers just said they were flat out exhausted. And frankly, I'm surprised it's as low as that.
Yeah, absolutely. We've all been through a lot, right? And this point in time, I was having a conversation with a client yesterday, and the only word that we could land on was that this point in time feels very messy, and it's a very challenging time for those people making decisions for their people. That there are no absolute rights or wrongs with any of this stuff, and no blueprint for what to do. So it does feel very confusing, very, very kind of messy. Are there any frameworks that you could share to help us understand what's happening with us emotionally at this point in time, and potentially using that to move forward to something a bit more practical?
Yeah, well, there are some. Again, go back to the data. I'm not going to suggest, we all go and pretend we're being astronauts en route to Mars, but it is quite interesting if you want to go look at that. But the framework I think is most useful is probably the stuff around reentry syndrome, and what happens when we return to something that we assume is familiar, because this is really the crux of the matter. So if you're interested in this, look up the work of a pair of psychologists called Gullahorn and Gullahorn, who really developed a lot on culture shock in the 90s. In the 80s and 90s, really, this is where this developed. The models, they were working a little bit earlier, but there's been a lot of work since. The classic work, though, Gullahorn and Gullahorn, on culture shock and reentry syndrome. So they started by looking at what happens, people who move overseas. That's, move from one environment to a completely different environment, which is something I've done a lot, right, in my life. So culture shock, you kind of expect it, right? Off you go. So there's a curve, which starts with kind of excitement and then goes, everything's new, there's novelty, going to struggle, it all becomes a bit much, overwhelming, then you adapt, and then you assimilate. Now, one of the things that Gullahorn and Gullahorn noticed when they were doing their work is that the same thing applied actually when you came home. And this was unexpected, because you're going back into a familiar environment. So why is it that actually a lot of people, and I am one of them, find this harder, find the coming back bit harder than the going away bit? And they developed a W curve. So now the classic kind of culture shock curve, the reentry syndrome curve, goes that dip, and then there's another dip. So basically goes back to what I said earlier, which is that because you know your environment, or you think you do, your kind of home turf, what your office looks like, you just assume you're going to be able to kind of click back into that. And actually you don't, because the world has changed, and we all know that, and it's going to take years before that shakes down. But also you have changed. Everything you've gone through has changed you. It's changed your relationships, it's changed your view on the world, it's changed your habits. And one of the things actually I recommend as an exercise is just take a minute and write down all the things in which you think you've changed, right through from relationships. Maybe your relationship's broken down, maybe a new one has started, maybe you've lost somebody, right through to personally, Nikki, I don't know about you, I can't face wearing heels. I used to wear heels. I look at my shoes.
I never could, Imogen. I never could.
Well, then I'm with you. I'm now on your plane, because I look at them and go, why on earth did I do that? It's so uncomfortable. I quite like my hair longer. as it's grown in lockdown. So there's, it's not good or bad, this. I've learned new skills. I'm better at some things. I've forgotten how to do others. And that is why actually coming back is often harder. Plus everybody else around you, and this is the unprecedented thing in this situation, everyone around you is going through the same thing, all with different kind of forms of change, different levels of fear, different levels of risk. Because also we're also trying to uncondition ourselves from a year of conditioning ourselves to be frightened, and with good reason. So that's still there too, and it just takes time. The Gallahorn research aligns with my personal experience. 3 to 6 months. It's a process of adaptation, and you're not going to be the same person at the end of it. Your world is going to be a little bit different. In what ways and how, I can't tell you, and you can't tell you, and you don't know. None of us know. But there is that second dip in the reentry curve. You sort of superficially assimilate, and then what tends to happen is that the deeper things start to come to the surface, that actually you don't, you don't like being in bars anymore. Maybe I came back from my first time living overseas, and I came back to my flat, which I'd missed very much. It was a lovely 1-bedroom flat in Muswell that I was very proud of, and I lived there when I came back for about 2 months before I realized actually I didn't fit there anymore. The time I'd been away for 6 months, I'd lived in a shared house, and I'd actually really loved it. And when I came back, I thought, I'll be happy back in my single bedroom flat. And I wasn't. I missed being with people. So I moved out. I actually ended up moving in, and I've never lived on my own again. So that really did change me. But it took 2 to 3 months before I could start to see what had not actually changed and what had changed and what I wanted to hang on to.
So we can expect then, Imogen, from what you're saying at this point in time, as we're beginning to re-enter work in a different way, so whether that's in the office or a bit of a hybrid of the two, we can expect to experience this second dip, which would you suggest? And from that, we can anticipate some time of readjustment for people, and it's going to be very personal.
Yes, I think that is the key thing. It is going to be very, very personal. I mean, some people may be absolutely fine. Some people may really, really struggle. There's so many factors at play here. As I said, what's happened to you over the last 18 months, but also your personal history, your background, your how much you liked your job in the first place, how much you liked your colleagues in the first place. There's so many different factors here. And so it's very hard to say, expect this to happen. I would say, don't be surprised if it does. Don't be surprised if you, find it very tiring to start with, because it is making great demands on your brain. You're having to rewire and, reconnect things and dismantle some of what you've built up over the last year. So don't be surprised if you are very tired or you find things very overwhelming. If you're not like that, brilliant, good for you. You might find in 3 months that actually you do hit a bit of a dip. You may be totally fine. You may find in 3 months that actually you start to notice the ways in which you have changed once, or the kind of initial froth and excitement and the and anxiety has passed. Once you've gone through that level of adaptation, you've remembered how to get to work, for example, you remembered your commute, you may find that more deeper changes start to make themselves felt.
So this is about bringing some compassion and curiosity for ourselves, but also for those people around us as well. We're talking specifically within the workplace, but understanding that we're all going to adapt and move through this time of change differently. So the more that we can sort of bring awareness to ourselves, but also be curious about other people around us, then potentially the more easeful we can move through this time of change.
Yeah, 100%. It's what I keep saying, if you are one of the people who's just super excited, then that's brilliant. Good for you. You're going to have a great time. But if you still need to know that the people around you are not in that place, and make allowances for that. And that applies to your colleagues. It also applies to clients. One of the really interesting things also, I haven't seen any recent data on this. The stuff I have is from last year, is that there's also really significant differences from country to country in how people feel. There was a piece of research last year which showed that, just asking about hot desking, which showed that in Italy, people had no issue with hot desking, but in Britain, people really were frightened of it. So if you're working internationally, you've got clients internationally, you also have to factor that in. And of course, now we're all at different stages. The UK is in some ways very much ahead of the game at the moment. But if you're working with people in India, for example, you have to allow for that to be very different. So a lot of flexibility, patience, because people are going to ask for one thing and then in months time, they might ask for something else. It's going to be bumpy. Maintaining kind of boundaries is going to be a challenge. Stopping a two-tier system developing from those who do go back into the office and those who don't, that's going to be a challenge. And nobody's got the answer. I think this is really important. If you're worried about this, I wish I could tell you that there was a formula, but there actually really isn't. So uncertainty is also a stressor. We find that very difficult. But if you can take a little bit of comfort in knowing that nobody's got the answers. The head of Goldman Sachs is saying everybody back in the office in June, come what may. At the other end of the spectrum, you've got HSBC selling off their office space, saying we don't think it's ever coming back. So there's, they're all guessing, really. And that's a really important thing for us all to remember. No one's planning, apart from Goldman Sachs, really planning on bringing everybody back. And I wouldn't recommend bringing everybody back. I'd recommend giving people the chance to come in for a morning, come in for an afternoon, just learn the routines again, get used to the space, decide if they like it. All of that, that's exposure therapy, really, in an office context, is just getting people to try things out, and then if they don't like it, if it's too much, then slow it down. If it all goes really well, you can speed it up, but everybody is going to be going at slightly different paces. It is going to be tricky. I think there's no way around that.
Absolutely. And I do hope, to echo your words, Imogen, that people listening to this who are responsible for people and for implementing changes at this point in time get some comfort from the fact that there are no absolute rights or wrongs. The answer isn't there. So yeah, I do hope that brings with it some comfort to take the pressure off, and the knowledge that this is all a bit of a work in progress, learn as we go time. I certainly know when I was responsible for the people in an agency in a previous life, I took comfort from the words, you can't please all the people all of the time. And I think never more so is that phrase true. This is going to be a big global experiment, I think.
It really is. And then there's all the practical stuff about how you manage office space, how you handle social distancing in the office. It's obviously good reasons in the UK for people putting everything off until June, but it's not going to be practical for many offices to have everybody back anyway. So there's all of that. It's like a mad three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle that HR people are trying to do. I mean, there are some things that I would suggest to people that they bear in mind or that they can apply, but it is going to be complex.
So on that word practical, I know that you've been in your previous roles often had to re-enter and have your own personal experience of doing that. What are the practical tools and techniques that you can share in terms of how you readjusted? I really like the conversation that we've had previously about choosing food from menus through to choosing what you wear to go back to work. So over to you on that, really, Imogen, from your experience, your practical advice.
Yeah, well, this is on a personal level, and some of it will apply in an office context. You can apply it in a group context, but certainly there are things that I've learned the hard way. Actually, we've been doing one of them for the last half hour because I found understanding that the process I was going through was normal and recognized and sort of had a name and a dynamic, that it wasn't just me, that it was okay to find going back into a home in inverted commas environment difficult. Not just because of all the brain adaptation we talked to, but also because you've got to reestablish a lot of relationships, and those have all changed. And when you come back into a home environment, people have, or work environment, you find that people have expectations of you. They have emotional expectations of you, of who you are. And so we're all going to have to do this kind of dance. And yeah, making allowances for that, being kind to yourself through it. I think two things I would say. One is take it slowly. So I've just moved back to London after being with my partner for the last 4 months. And I haven't really told people that I'm back in London. And that's very deliberate, because in the past I've come back and gone, woohoo, you know, I'm home, let's have a party. And it's just been completely overwhelming seeing, and I've ended up sort of overwrought, overwhelmed, exhausted, miserable, because I was like, but I've been looking forward to seeing people for so long. Why is it difficult? So pace yourselves. Having said that, the stretch principle is important. You know, staying at home, like not doing any of it, avoiding, is not going to help you. It's just going to reinforce the anxiety. So doing little things and being honest about what you need. So if you have a friend who's saying, you know, our local pub's reopened, come with me for a pint, I can't wait, but you're not comfortable being indoors, say, I would love to see you, I can't wait, but, you know, would you mind, can we go sit in the park just for this initial time? Can we be outside? Don't be afraid to express your needs. You may find that the other person actually is quite relieved that they're also in the same boat. So if you say to people, I'm not hugging, if that's your thing. I was talking to somebody the other day who had a friend who just launched herself and hugged, and she was like, I can't deal. And so don't be that person, and don't be the person who's afraid to say, actually, I'm not, I need a bit of distance. It'll pass, it's temporary, but it's, you know, you've got a lot of conditioning to unpack. So being honest about what you need and recognizing what other people need. So when you see people, you say, are you hugging? Are we elbow bumping? What are we doing? You can make it light, but you making that negotiation explicit will really help. Doing what you can to reduce your cognitive load. I mean, there's only so much. You look at cognitive load theory, we can learn, we can adapt at any one day. So reducing that burden is also helpful. Reducing decision making, which is actually one of the most cognitively sort of high maintenance things that we do. And I think men do have an advantage here, actually. If you look at, there's lots of kind of industry leaders who very purposely and explicitly do things like wear the same clothes every day, not literally the same clothes, but the same look. So Zuckerberg has his grey t-shirt, Steve Jobs had his black polo neck. And as I said, it's kind of easier for guys, but just not adding that stress to your life about, you know, what do I wear when I go into the office? Just go back to basics.
And that was very intentional. Sorry to break in,
yeah,
Imogen, but
it was.
Those leaders did that very intentionally. Can you explain why that is?
Barack Obama did it too. He just had suits, and I think honestly it's why some women get stylists, because it's the cognitive load thing. It just reduces the amount of decision making you have to make in your day. If you know exactly what you're going to wear in the morning and you don't have to think about it, you have brain space for other things, because making decisions, making choices and thinking through and we're very caught up in the idea that we need to make the right choice. So if that's where your brain energy is going, you know, you've got a finite amount of brain energy every day. If that's where it's going, it's not going to other stuff. And if you're kind of leader of the free world, as Barack Obama was, he felt that there were other things that he wanted to be putting his mental headspace into. So yeah, it's a very deliberate strategy. My dad used to have exactly the same lunch every day, because it just meant he didn't have to think about it, didn't have to look at a menu, didn't have to make a decision. So that kind of thing, cutting back on its extraneous decisions, it's probably not the time to decide to remodel your house, for example, or take on new projects if you don't have to. But as I said, this is a stretch principle. Don't go to the pub if you don't want to. Do find a situation where you can meet your friends, which feels right to you. Small groups, one-on-one. It's okay to be low key about it. Exercise, you're going to love me for saying this, Nikki, but exercise is very good for your brain. It does increase neuroplasticity, which is what we want. We want the brain's adaptive capacity to be supported. So keeping up those rituals and the exercise that you've developed during lockdown, that's going to keep your brain going. Actually, this is a real challenge for me, because I stopped for about a week, and now my boyfriend is kicking my bum and saying I need to not do that, and he's absolutely right. So those, I think, are the main things. And just being kind to yourself. You know, if you do find it a bit overwhelming, step back for a couple of days. It will come. You do adapt. Human beings are phenomenally adaptable. If you just support yourself, you'll be amazed how actually your mind and body do just adapt, to the point where you might be surprised by how much you do go back to familiar patterns. Psychologists call them schema, those kind of deep conditioning patterns of thought and behavior. And the big question at the moment, and it's fascinating, is actually how much they have changed. That's the question. Is the first lockdown, I thought we will go back if this ends. I didn't think it was going to end, but that, because it was, 4 months is not long enough really to change deep laid schema, but 14 months, 15 months, that's a different question. And so we're going to find out. It's never been done on this scale before, this many people going through this all at once. And my challenges when I came back from overseas were different, because everyone else around me was, they did have I was trying to fit back into something that everybody else was part of. Now we've all got to co-create what our new normal looks like, and that's going to happen in the office, and it's going to happen at home, and in our personal lives. And in the office, it's going to take probably a few goes to get it right, because there's just too many moving parts. So flexibility and adaptivity and kindness to yourself and others, while also encouraging people to at least go into that stretch zone, push themselves a little bit out of their comfort zone. That is going to be the name of the game.
Lovely, thank you. Yeah, so we are sort of navigating this on an individual level, but on a collective level as well. And I to echo again your words, bringing that kindness to ourselves and each other, I think is definitely something we should be thinking about. And I really liked that concept of brain energy as well. We've only got a certain amount of brain energy, so to conserve it for the really important stuff and the really important decisions. And if, like me, you're putting on the same few options for clothing every day, then feel safe in the knowledge that you're using your brain energy to be making other decisions. I think that's quite an interesting concept and thought there. Thank you.
There are a few other things. I mean, from an office point of view, this is a collective thing. I think there are clearly we did sort of have a dry run at this last year when everyone kind of thought we might go back and then didn't. So there is some learning from that also can apply. There is still, and it might surprise some, quite a high residual level of fear of catching COVID at the office. So one thing you can do in an office context is really be not just put your protocols in place, but really communicate them well. That is what really helps people manage that anxiety, is knowing what to expect and what's being done to protect them, and what they need to do to protect themselves and the people around them. So having very clear guidance around that's very well communicated, that will bring anxiety down, as will making people feel like they're being consulted, that they feel like they've got a say in what's being decided for them. And that is going to be a dynamic dialogue. That's not a one-off consultation exercise. It's very much ongoing. But the data from last year, in fact, I can probably find it. I'm trying to find a more updated version, but I haven't seen updated versions data. It's from last year. It's from July last year, and I will find it in a second. But it basically says that there is a really significantly higher number of people who feel anxious, who report anxiety, if they feel they haven't been consulted.
Absolutely, and thank you for making the point about communication, because I think that's really, really key. We know that sort of in the normal world, how those businesses and leaders that are communicating regularly and often see a higher level of engagement from their people, but now I think more than ever communication is really key, and communication that you might not get all of this stuff right first time as leaders and people who are responsible for bringing in these changes, and I think that consultative approach is something very, very much to consider at this point in time, to ensure you're constantly listening to people, safe in the knowledge that, as we've already talked about quite a lot, opinions are going to be differing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you might not be able to act or implement on what they asked for, but the process of consultation is what delivers. That's the message here, not kind of we tend to be very outcome focused. I found that data from the CIPD, it's June actually last year, 62% of employees who are not consulted about returning feel anxious about it, compared to 42% of those who are. So there you are, you get a 20% drop in anxiety levels just by handling consultation. Another thing we always recommend is that behavior is modeled by managers. Yes. Senior management's role in this is really, really important. So if you are senior management, if you are able to talk frankly about your adaptation process, and if you call it that and take it away from kind of mental health language, people are often more comfortable talking about this, and share, what's happening for you, but also maintain those boundaries from your side. It's much easier for people to maintain their boundaries if you maintain yours. So all that stuff about not emailing late at night, not making last minute requests of people, not changing protocols and without, just landing them on people, all of that still applies, and more important for it than ever for you when you are back in the office to do the whole kind of, how are you feeling, a bit elbow bumping, like make sure you are really modeling the protocols and the behavior that you've determined through your working, your organizational process.
Yeah, really,
one final point actually connected with that is to not neglect the social side of being back in the office, because that's what people really, really miss. They miss seeing colleagues. And so picnic lunches, outdoor stuff, and be very careful to think of ways to include those who are still working from home. But those opportunities for people just to spend time together, not working, actually are really, really, really important, because that is the number one thing that people have missed about traveling to an office.
Absolutely, that certainly reflects the conversations that we have. It's those small moments when you're boiling the kettle and having those little connections that people are missing. So whatever the re-entry is going to look like for people, be it hybrid or working from home or back in the office, like bringing back those moments of connection. I completely agree. However you do that, dial it up, because that is going to be the thing that brings that sense of belonging for people.
Absolutely. One final thing actually is about inclusivity, just to reinforce that point, because one of the things we do know about the pandemic is that the impact has been really disproportionately high on some social groups over others, particularly women, particularly contractors, particularly anybody who's had to deal with childcare, which is primarily that has fallen on women. So people who have had those extra challenges will need a bit more support and a bit more flexibility. And, the buzzword in England at the moment is levelling up. That's the government's language. We need to apply it in our offices as well, and make sure that the systems we bring in don't accidentally marginalize or make life harder for those who have faced particularly acute challenges or have particularly specific challenges that will remain for many people even after we've gone back to normal. So look after your marginalized staff.
Yeah, thank you, Imogen. A really good point to make. And again, it circles back to that compassion and curiosity for those people around you. We've had a question come in, so I'm going to share that with you and invite anybody else to share questions for Imogen now. So we've had a question which asks, you say that you were good at adaptation, that we're good at adaptation as humans, but what can organizations and leaders do to help their people to flex their adaptability? Thank you. Put my teeth in, muscle. I like the idea of that. Or build their flexible mindset to prepare people to cope better with change at this point in time, but also going forward. So if you manage to unravel my words.
Lovely, lovely question. How do organizations support adaptive capacity? I think it's a mix of removing as many barriers as you can for people. So, the things like if people can only come in on one day a week, adapting to that, just making it as easy as possible, and all that stuff around having the protocols really clear and how the organization is handling safety really clear, all of that, removing barriers. So you're encouraging people to go into that stretch zone. That's what you want, is people kind of going into into the stretch zone. I work with an organization at the moment that has a really interesting system that I hadn't actually come across before, which is mental health hours, not days, but hours. So if somebody, and I said, this is going to be kind of, for some people, this is going to be every day, it's going to be a bit of a roller coaster. So for people who have, you know, are struggling or just need the afternoon to kind of just need to go and have a nap, all of that. This idea that you can email your manager and say, look, I just need a couple of hours of downtime. And what you find a lot of the time, you put those sort of systems in place, is that the take up can be quite low. That does not mean they're not valuable. It's people knowing that they have that option to step back and to recalibrate when they need it, that actually enables them to take the kind of adaptive stretch.
Really love that concept.
Isn't it great? I thought that was really cool. Mental health hours. So it all comes back to stuff, Nikki, you and I teach and work on so much in our mental health work, which is making sure that people can be open. And if someone is really struggling, then a bit of support for them will not go amiss. But you need to know, knowing your staff is going to be really critical, and having those open lines of communication and supporting your managers in that. Because often I think I've spoken to so many managers over this pandemic who really want to support their staff, and whose staff expect support from them and complain that they don't get it, but they feel like they've had no training, no kind of support, that there's, you know, that they then become the bottleneck for all the kind of the angst. But also I want to say, finally, I think this is also going to be a delightful process for ultimately, and for many of us, we have a chance, not just because it's great to see each other again and it's great to engage, but also because we have a really amazing opportunity to co-create a future together in our workplaces and in our lives. I was talking to a very eminent psychiatrist who's a friend of my mum's actually the other day about this, and it's so rare when to have been in a situation where there really aren't any answers and there really aren't any frameworks and there is no template, and to really seize that opportunity to co-create something together that's really going to work. My dream is that ultimately we go into a situation which works better for all of us, that women have the amount they do in the workplace, recognize that guys who want to take paternity leave but have felt that's culturally, you know, not allowed within their organizations, that they now can, or those guys who've loved spending time at home with their babies and their children, and that we are moving to a more equitable future. It goes against all the research around pandemics and epidemics, incidentally, but that I think is the dream and the hope, and it is an opportunity to seize rather than something to fear, I hope.
I love that, Imogen. Thank you. And I think that's a beautiful place to sort of close and tie up this conversation on a point of hope. And with a hope that I love this idea of co-creating and moving forward with optimism and growth. You know, there's so much we are going to have learnt and grown from as a result of everything that's happened and will continue to happen. So I think a point of hope is a lovely point to close this conversation on this time of change. What I would like to ask you, though, please, we ask this of all of our guests on our Walk the Talk webcast, is we talk about well-being non-negotiables, so things that you like to do every day, the daily or weekly, that support your well-being. So you see them as non-negotiables. I know you're a fan of a cold shower, so that might be one of them. But if you can come up with 3 on the spot, Imogen, of your well-being non-negotiables, I'd love to hear what they are.
The top of my list is sleep, actually.
Brilliant.
If your sleep goes, your chances of anything else delivering massively decrease. So sleep, patience with yourself. I went out for lunch with my family and then saw friends in the evening a couple of weekends ago, and it was great, but I was exhausted afterwards. And knowing that that's okay, go home, sleep. I've gone through the stretch. You'll be a little bit more next time. It'll be even more enjoyable and slightly less tiring. That kind of trajectory, I think, supporting myself through that. Cold showers, do love cold shower. And I'm so excited about, for those of you who feel you can handle it, physical contact coming back. I think the touch starvation, the oxytocin thing has been really really damaging. It's so significant physiologically, like your immune system is supported by touch, all sorts of things. So physical contact, when you can handle it, I think is really significant. And if you can't handle people, we've said it all the way through, pets, borrow someone's cat, go play with the dog in the park, but get your, particularly if you've been properly isolating, like shielding, get your physical contact with other living creatures thing back up again. Get outside. We're doing this in summer. It's going to be beautiful. Hopefully, it's England. You never know, but get outside and touch things.
Absolutely. Here's to that. And we do encourage everyone that we talk to, particularly those people who are in charge of people within the workplace and beyond, to look after themselves as well. So we would encourage everybody to think about what your individual well-being non-negotiables are, and really get those bedded in place as your foundation of well-being as we all continue to navigate this time of change. So thank you so much, Imogen, for today. Really appreciate all of your knowledge and experience. And thank you for everybody for joining our conversation today. We will be coming back on the 30th of June. The theme is going to be remote working. We'll have had a bit more time seeing what this hybrid world looks like. So we will be discussing and exploring that further on the 30th of June. Thank you, everybody, for joining, and look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks very much, Imogen.
Thanks for having me. It's been fun.